Hey there, my name is John Middick. In this demonstration, I'm going to start this portrait the same way I start just about every single portrait that I ever work on. And it's always done mostly the same way every single time. So how I start out is I get my line drawing first on my paper. And so it's sort of just a rough sketch. And now the next thing that I do is I'll erase most of this and then I'll start with one pencil. That's right, just one pencil. Why do I do that? I use an approach that I like to call grisaille. It's a grisaille technique or a grisaille method. That's a French term, comes from a term that just means gray. I'm not using a gray pencil. A lot of the old masters use just like a gray underpainting. Sometimes they would just leave it in this grisaille, gray, monotone kind of look. But then sometimes they would work on top of that with more layers of paint. So the reason for the method is it enables you to work out all of your values at the very beginning of the process. And so the first stage of the process is figuring out where all of these values belong. And once you've troubled through that, then you can start to add your next layer, and on my next layer, I start to add maybe a color, and on top of that, and then I start to add more colors. And so I'm starting with this principle of going in here with one layer that is one particular pencil color, and I'll talk about that color in a moment. But I'm also doing something where I'm only concerned with and only focusing on the values, which oversimplifies everything. The next layer of color that I lay on top is getting more concerned with color, but I'm not overly concerned with color yet. As I keep moving progressively towards more and more layers on top, then what I'm doing is I am adding more complexity and figuring out what the actual colors need to be. I don't need to start knowing everything from the beginning. All I need to know is where the values are. Next thing I need to know is maybe what the local color is. And so I'll talk more about that as we progress here in this particular portrait. So first thing I did was I got my line drawing on my surface, and then I have a desaturated reference image right there. So something with no color, right? The next thing I did was I posterized the black and white version so that I can see where those values are and oversimplify where the values are. And then I've got a color version. Another thing that I like to do as I start to work more in color, and we can talk about it a little later on, but I like to print a darker version so that when I'm working in the lightest areas, I can see some of the development of the form a little bit more in volume. And then I also like to print out a lighter version so that when I'm in the darkest shadowed areas, I can see more detail there as well. All right, so that's about it as far as any kind of preliminary before we begin. So I'm going to lay those aside. And I'm going to start with this black and white version, look at it while I'm creating this particular refinement of the initial drawing. And as I start to eliminate some of the extra information that I have on here, or some of the lines that just don't matter right now. So I used a call erase, Prismacolor call erase pink color to get that line drawing on there. When I initially started, I used a blue call erase pencil, and then I put that down and traced over that after I've got my initial roadmap drawing created. So now that I've traced over this with my pink, I'm going to come in here and just remove most of this. I'm going to grab a piece of tape, and I'm going to put that over here just to keep this surface stable. I've got this on some chipboard just to get this initial drawing put down on here, and I want something a little substantial underneath there, so that's the reason for that. Okay. It's going to look for some of the harshest lines right now and remove most of those, just using a kneaded eraser to do that. And it doesn't take much to remove a col erase pencil, because a col erase pencil is erasable, and you can totally erase everything that you put on your surface. I am using Pastelmat by Clairefontaine, and if you're not familiar with Pastelmat, it's a very unique surface, just one side that you work on, and it's sort of a stable, sturdy surface to use for colored pencil. And one thing I like about it is you can put multiple layers on there, and it's not going to damage the tooth of the paper. It has sort of a velvety, smooth feel to it, but yet it is substantial enough that you can get so many layers, nearly endless amounts of layers on its surface. So I love this particular paper, especially for colored pencil work. Okay, just removing most of this because I don't want this pink to show through. Okay, so for this demo, what I want to do is work mostly on the mouth, just to give you more of an idea of how you would progress and work out some of the details using this grisaille technique. All right, so let's go ahead and start with our first layer, and this is the grisaille technique that we're going to employ now. So I'm going to use Polychromos Caput Mortuum, which is pencil number 169, and all I'm going to be focused on in this particular demonstration is drawing the mouth. So that's the only thing that I'm going to concern myself with in this demo, and it'll give you a taste of how to progress through here with just drawing the mouth. I've got a natural border to that mouth right now because the mouth and cheek have a border with this particular hand that's up here on our subject's cheek. This is my daughter, by the way. So I will just outline that. I don't really need to do too much more with it. Just create that outline right there. Okay. And the next thing I want to do then is outline where the darkest areas are. So natural border to an area that I'm concerned with. Usually I'll depict that with a line. Okay. So the next thing that I'll do is I'll try to find where a line could be indicated. So there's a natural little line right in here, and I always want to keep a very sharp pencil. So I may need to sharpen this up in just a moment. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more here. I know it'll cut off a little bit of what you can see. I'm going to try to move this over. Maybe we can zoom in more so you can see this better. And I'm only concerned with the darkest areas. So I'm looking for the darkest spots in this particular spot right here in this particular area. So I am going to go ahead and indicate where those nostrils are. And even though I've got that pink kind of ghosting through, and I can see it just a little bit. I can't see it a whole lot, and I'm not going to rely on that either. I'm not going to rely on what I created with that pink pencil and think of it as being sacrosanct or just absolutely perfect and in the right spot. But no, I'm going to try and redraw that as accurately as possible. So I'm looking at the reference. I'm not looking at my line drawing. I'm looking at my reference right now. Okay, so I'm going to just indicate where some of these edges are. That's what I'm concerned with, are the edges in the line drawing. That will help me to understand this particular model and this particular pose that I'm wanting to depict. I find that it's best to hire your own model. I mean, in the case of my daughter, I didn't have to hire her, but I like to hire my own models and use references that I've hired the model and paid for their time, because it just helps me to have more ownership of my artwork. And so I would really recommend that, if you've not ever done that, to be an artist. If you're not able to do it right now, that's fine, but make that maybe a goal to be in charge of your artwork from beginning to end. Be an active participant and someone who is not relying on other people's photographs ultimately, because you want to be in the driver's seat when it comes to the creative process. So mostly I'm wanting to just create an outline. I am shading just a little bit, but I'm trying to just indicate where some of that shading will occur. All right. That's all my raw talk about reference photos. But I do think it's important that if you start to take your art very seriously, that try to be in charge of your artwork. Try to be the one that is in complete ownership of the creative process from start to finish. Okay, let me indicate where this shadow is, this form shadow. And the reason why this matters to me right here is because it's the dark value. So I'm trying to indicate the darkest values first. And I'm also trying to outline where some of the boundary marks are within the anatomy, right? So that's what matters right now. Nothing else matters. The details don't matter. Just the boundary areas. Those are important, and everything else is detail. So I'm primarily trying to think about just boundaries, and that's what the line is indicating. But there's really no lines on, we're not going to end up having lines by the time we're done, right? We're going to eliminate those because there's no lines on a human face. A line is a convention that we have made up as artists. And so we create lines, and we can use lines as a creative expression. But there's a little cast shadow right here that I want to indicate. And it's very subtle right there, but it moves over into a form shadow. So I'm just indicating where it is right now. I'm not drawing it. That's all I'm doing. Okay, so I want to come back up here because we're drawing the mouth for this particular demo. Gotta darker shadow right there at the nasal labial fold, just on the other side of the ala, the outside edge of the nostril. Got a hard edge on the nose right here. We always have a hard edge on the nose right there on the outside edge of the ala again. And then kind of this cartilage just wraps around, gives us this particular form. I'm just going to shade that in just a little tiny bit. The biggest thing I want to do, though, is indicate where the darkest values are. So where are they? Right here, the separation between the lips and the nostrils, and then right here at the chin. So that's what's important. We've also got this boundary mark down here at the bottom edge of the chin. We've got some subtleties going on here with some of the value gradients right there, but I'm not going to worry about it at the moment. I just want to look that over and ask myself, did I capture everything for this particular grisaille? And I think I did for this line drawing, right? So I think I did. This mouth might need to come up just a little bit more right there. And so I think I've got everything in place. I could sort of indicate a little bit more about where that spot is right there that creates a form edge, right? All right. So that's the way I want that to look at the moment. All right, so let's keep going. One thing I like to do is I like to have about 3 different pencils sharp and ready to go. That way I don't have to sit there and wait on a pencil. If I've got to take time, pause what I'm doing, go to the pencil sharpener, it just becomes distracting and I may forget my thought process and what I was trying to accomplish over here, where I was, and the list can go on and on. So I want to try and eliminate any kind of distraction like that. Okay, so now that we've got these rudimentary lines in here and we kind of know a little bit more about what we're doing there, I'm going to come back now, and I didn't press very hard, and I don't want to press very hard. But the next thing I do want to accomplish is creating a little more definition in the form and relating the darkest areas to part of the volume of each of these areas that I'm depicting. And so if I've got a dark line, which, like we talked about, a line is a convention that artists have made up. It doesn't exist in nature. We have edges to values, right? So if I've got a dark line then separating the lips, then I need to make sense of that. It needs to have some kind of context, right? So the thing that I want to do then is start in the darkest area within that line. And obviously that's going to be over here on this side because the shadows are over here. We've got a light source coming way over here on this side somewhere, hitting our form, hitting the cheek, hitting the side plane of the nose, right here on the cylindrical portion of the mouth as it moves out away from the face and the mandible and the maxilla up here, but and down here on the chin as well. But then what happens is something interesting. I've got shadows that start to develop over here on the left-hand side, right? But I've not really indicated that yet. So now I want to start with those darkest lines and start to develop those areas and move those away from that spot. So in other words, let me talk about it as I'm doing it here. This is the darkest area over in the darkest spot. That's my assumption. Now, let me verify that a little bit. I can look at, if I need some help with that, I can look at the lips and look at that line and look at this posterized version where I've used, I think it was about 7 a 7 posterization. So that just means I have a black and a white, which is 2, right? And then the rest of it is made up of my middle values. So I've got, about 5 middle values in order to have 7 different values represented. So my darkest one is going to be right there. It's going to be in the pupil, right? So this line right here is maybe as dark as the pupil. It should not probably be darker than the pupil. We want the pupil to be the darkest spot on any portrait, right? So I want to go back over here and go back to my more detailed, desaturated version. Pull it back up so that I can see everything more clearly. And I'm going to dedicate this dark line to parts of that bottom lip. Now, why would I do that? Why would I not use the top lip? Well, the reason for that is, and the reason why we might think that we would use the top lip is because the top lip is always darker. It's like 99% of the time, the top lip is going to be darker than the bottom lip. Why is that? Because the top lip jets, right, it moves back towards the opening of the mouth, right? That's the angle. That's the plane of that particular shape of this feature. The plane right there on that mouth is moving back towards the mouth. What about the plane on the bottom lip? The plane on the bottom lip is moving away from the teeth, right? It's moving away from that opening in the mouth. And so because of that, it's capturing more light. It is reflecting more light. And as it moves away from that area, there is a form edge that's happening. So most of the darkness that I have in the bottom lip can create a subtle little gradient in the separation in that top and bottom lip can create a subtle gradient to the bottom inside the bottom lip. Now, not always. And in this case over here where I've got strong light hitting everything, and this is horizontal light, I see that there is just a very, very small little gradient on that bottom lip. And then there's more of a gradient, if you want to call it that, but there's more of a darker value up here on the top lip. So I'm just going to fill that in for right now. Fill in that top lip, but I want to pay attention to how those values are working right there. So it's darker right over here, darker right there, slightly lighter right in here. Again, I can go back to my posterized version. Where is it? There it is. I can kind of verify that if I need to. Darker right here. Let's see that subtle gradient as it moves up. And then lighter right over there. So I can make that slightly darker over here. And then right there at the edge, before we get to the edge of the mouth, then we've got that area where the lip just kind of tucks up under. And it's not really seen. I don't see the color of the lip over there. Now remember, the lips themselves are going to be red, obviously. Some version of red and pink. Because they are closer akin to the skin type that is inside the mouth. It's not the same type of skin that we have in areas around the mouth. It's not part of the skin type that we have on the face. All right, so I am noticing something that I've got maybe just a little too much information up there. I've got those lips not quite that full. They're a little thinner than that. So I'm going to remove just a little bit of that on top. And I don't want to rely on a real harsh lip line on the outside edge. don't want to do that. So I want to be careful about that. I'm going to come over here, shade this in, try to make it nearly as solid as I can. Make it one value over here on the left-hand side. And I do want it to be slightly darker than what I've got over there on the right-hand side. I think you'll see that in this posterized version for sure, that the darkest value is right in there, right over here. This little sliver might be as dark as that portion on the right-hand side. Okay. So, and this might be just a little bit dark, so I can lighten that up. Just a small amount, just tap it just a little bit, because I want color to be part of my layers on the lips, right? So I want to reserve a little bit of room on the tooth, right? Well, there's plenty of room on this tooth right now. Okay. So that should do it for that top lip for right now. Maybe just a little tiny bit of information right here, but a small amount of shading right up there. So the biggest thing is I want to eliminate that look of a harsh line separating the lips. I don't want that. Okay, then what about over here on this side? Going to add just a little bit of shade, a little bit of shading right below there, not a lot. Okay, now I'm just going to work my way down. So right here on the lips, and I'm not worried about texture right now. I'm not worried about the way that these lips look and contour lines and all that. I'm not worried about that right now. I'm worried about the general shapes of the values right now. So I want to look for the next logical values. And generally, I want to shade a little bit of those in here. I can leave some of that white if I want to, but I don't necessarily have to. As long as I put a little bit of value in here, I can make it a lighter value, but I don't have to use just the white of the paper because I'm on Pastelmat. I can go back on top with a pure white if I feel like I need that. I don't really think that there is white on the lips though, but I'm just trying to prove a point here. The only white that I would say we've got in here is probably nowhere, actually. But if you wanted to cheat in some white, you could probably do it right there, maybe right there. Maybe you could do something over here, you know, if you wanted to. But again, I don't think it's necessary because we've got, you know, we've got color in here instead. Okay, so I'm going to move that up just a little bit. And again, I'm going to be a little overly concerned about that top edge. And because I don't want it to be too dominant. And switch pencils here. I think this is a new pencil. The Cupid's bow. I want to kind of know where that is on the lips right there. And that should do it. Okay. We move to the bottom here. I'm going to rely more on a shading underneath bottom lip to indicate to me where that lip stops and where the top of the chin is. I'm going to make this slightly darker over here towards the right. And then as everything moves over, it will get slightly lighter right in here because there's more light that will corrupt that area. Where we start to turn from light into the shadow, that's usually what we call the turn there is the terminator. So we've got shadow that will begin over here, and I'll shade that in. But the darkest spot typically is going to be right over here, past the terminator into the core shadow, right? Just that little spot where we start to turn. And then right up here by the hand, this is where we'll enhance that line even more, because that represents to us some occlusion shadows. Shadows that are there because of three-dimensionality. We are not able to see past. Can't see past where one object is and the next one begins, right? So right in there, it's going to be very dark. Those are occlusion shadows. That will be just as dark, probably, as the corners of the mouth. The corners of the mouth, we can always make dark. The darkest area, we can make that the darkest area. Whether we see that or not in our reference photo, we can always do that. We can cheat that in and make it darker in the corners of the mouth, because, again, that's a cylindrical area, the mouth is, and those move back towards the teeth more than anything else. And there's, on the other side over here is where the muscles collect and come together. That's the reason why it's got a slight indentation over here, and it's shaded right over this way. And then right here, I'm going to draw in just a little bit of that nasolabial fold right over here, even though you really don't see it too much in this portrait. But right here, we've got these little donut holes right there, because on this other side, those muscles collect, they come together right there, and then light picks up in that spot because they bulge just a little bit. And that differs from person to person, right? So I'm going to remove some of those construction lines that I put in there just for myself, so that I kind of know where those are. And that line right there is getting a little harsh, so I'll remove that. But most of the time, I'm not going to be overly concerned with erasing early on with this Grisaille method. So I'm combining a couple of steps here where I'm redefining the line drawing, but at the same time, I'm also starting to create my initial Grisaille technique, my Grisaille layer, which helps me to start understanding this form and this subject better. So it helps me with understanding it and creating the values. And once I've done that, then that's going to make my job easier when I start adding everything else on top. Okay, let me scoot that over. I've got a little tiny line. I'm going to be nitpicky here for a moment. We got a little tiny line just gaining on me and getting a little distracting there. I'm not even sure why that is. Might be a defect in the paper. Sometimes that happens with Pastelmat. It won't matter in the long run, but it just kind of matters to me at the moment when I'm looking at it usually. Okay, so that's plenty dark. I'm going to move all the way back over here, and I'll darken up everything around that corner of the mouth again, because of the reasons we just talked about. There is the landscape of the face, in the feature of the mouth, all of those muscles come together, but this spot, they recess. They're a recessed area, and it goes back towards the skull, towards the teeth in this case. Okay, now let's move away from there and just create a subtle shading beyond that dark area. The same thing over here. It's a little early on for me to lose my edge, my boundary mark on where the lips are. I'm going to indicate those right there so that I kind of know where those lips are. Okay. Now, let me take a look here. The lips tuck up under, so I don't want the value of the lips to be right in this area. There's a little vacant area right there. It's going to be much lighter right in there because it'll be the skin type and color and all that of the mouth part, everything around there. So I'm going to move away from the lips, and now that I've got the lips indicated, that value right there of the lips represents the value that I am stating is part of the lips. So my job now is to find the value up above the lips right here in the mouth that is slightly lighter than the lips. Not a lot lighter, because I can look at this particular reference and squint my eyes so that I'm pushing those values together. And there's not a big difference between this part, this value right here in the lips, and this value right here in the mouth, right? This value in the lips right here is probably equal to this value right here under the nostril. So it's a subtle area. So I'm going to use a linear stroke. With that line, I'm just shading this in a very subtle way. I'm going to go all the way up here. I'm going to work on the bottom part of this nose a little bit while we're there, might as well. But I've got a hard edge right here on that outside edge of the ala. That represents one of the only hard edges in the nose, right? And so I can dedicate some of that dark value to this spot right here where the nasolabial fold, this little area that separates the cheek, whole cheek from the nose, right? Because this nose, it comes back, that part of the cartilage comes back, wraps itself back around that nostril, because the nostril moves out away from the face, but it recedes back, it pushes itself back into the face right there, and then we're flat against that part of the cheek for a moment, and then it starts to curve again. Okay, so let's go ahead and darken that up. And I'm going to grab another pencil. So I want it to be dark right up there by the nose. And that's a good barometer for me to understand how dark or light it needs to be in between here.